A priest asked Carl Jung, "Do you believe in God?" Jung looked at him and said 3 words that changed everything. "I don't believe." The priest smiled, thinking Jung was an atheist. But then Jung said, "I don't believe because I know." The priest's face went pale, because Jung wasn't talking about faith, he was talking about experience. He had met God face to face, and what he saw terrified him. This was not the God of churches, not the God of comfort, not the God of love and mercy. Jung said, "The God I experienced is not what religion teaches." And for the rest of his life, Jung tried to explain what he meant by knowing God, not believing, knowing. Because belief is for people who have not experienced. But once you experience, belief becomes irrelevant, and what replaces it is something far more profound and far more terrifying. Jung spent 60 years studying this, the psychology of God, not as a religious concept, but as a psychological reality, something that exists in the unconscious, something that speaks, something that transforms, and something that demands you face it, whether you are ready or not. So what did Jung discover? What does it mean to know God? And why did it terrify him for the rest of his life? Let me show you. When Jung said, "I know," he was not talking about faith. He was talking about direct experience, a psychological encounter with something in the unconscious that he called God. But this was not God as religion defines it. This was God as a psychological force, an archetype, the deepest structure in the human psyche. Jung said, "God is not outside of you. God is the self, the totality of your unconscious. And when you encounter it, it feels like meeting God." This is what most people do not understand. Jung was not an atheist, but he was also not religious. He was psychological. He believed God exists, but not as a being in the sky, as a reality in the unconscious mind. And this God is experienced, not believed. Jung had his first experience at age 12, a vision, so powerful, so terrifying that he could not speak about it for 60 years. He saw God sitting on a golden throne high above the world, and beneath God was the most beautiful church, Basel Cathedral, his father's church. And then God did something unthinkable. God dropped something onto the church, and the entire cathedral exploded, shattered, destroyed. Jung woke up shaking, not because of the destruction, but because he understood what it meant. God wanted to destroy the church, the institution, the doctrine, the rules, because religion was keeping people from the real experience of God. Jung realized belief is not enough, doctrine is not enough, going to church is not enough. If you want to know God, you must go inward, into your own unconscious, where God is waiting. This vision changed Jung's entire life. He could not tell his father, a Protestant minister who believed in the church, who believed in doctrine, who believed in faith. Jung knew if he told his father what he saw, it would destroy him. So he stayed silent for decades. But the vision never left him. It haunted him, guided him, shaped his entire psychology. Because what Jung learned that day, at age 12 was this: God is not in the church, God is in the psyche. And if you want to meet God, you must descend into your own unconscious, into the darkness, into the parts of yourself you are afraid to see. And there you will find it, the self, the God within, not loving, not comforting, but whole, complete, containing everything, light and darkness, good and evil, creation and destruction. Jung said, people think God is only good, but that is a lie. God is whole, and wholeness includes the shadow. This was Jung's great discovery. God has a dark side, and religion tries to hide it. They teach you God is love, God is light, God is mercy. But Jung said that is only half. The other half is destruction, chaos, the terrifying force that breaks you open so that you can become whole. This is what Jung experienced, not the God of churches, but the God of transformation, the God that destroys so you can be reborn. And once you experience this God, you cannot go back to belief, because now you know.
So what is God psychologically? Jung spent 60 years answering this question, and what he found changed everything. God is not a being. God is an archetype, the central archetype of the collective unconscious. Jung called it the self, the totality of your psyche, conscious and unconscious, known and unknown, light and shadow, all of it combined. And when you encounter the self, it feels like encountering God, because it is bigger than you, wiser than you, more powerful than you. It knows things your conscious mind cannot access. It sees patterns you cannot see. It guides you toward wholeness, even when it feels like destruction. Jung said, the self is not your ego. Your ego is tiny, a fragment. But the self is vast, infinite, and it contains everything you are, everything you were, everything you will become. This is why religious people call it God, because when you experience it, you feel awe, terror, surrender. The same feelings people describe in religious experiences. But Jung said, this is not supernatural, this is psychological. The self is built into every human being. It is the deepest structure of consciousness, and everyone will encounter it eventually. Through dreams, through visions, through crisis, through suffering, the self will break through and force you to see it. Jung documented this in thousands of patients, people who had never studied psychology, never read religious texts, never heard of archetypes, but they all described the same experience, meeting something inside themselves that felt divine. One patient told Jung, I saw a light, brighter than anything I have ever seen, and I knew this was God, but it was inside me, not outside. Another patient said, I felt like I was being watched by something ancient, something that knew me better than I know myself. Jung said, this is the self. It is always there, always watching, always guiding, but most people never notice it because they are too identified with the ego. The ego is your surface self, your identity, your personality, your thoughts, your beliefs. But beneath the ego is the self, waiting, patient, eternal. And it will not force itself on you. It will wait until life breaks you open, until suffering strips away the ego. And then it emerges. And when it does,
you realize you were never alone. You were never lost. You were always being guided by something deeper, something wiser, something that has been there since before you were born. Jung called this the God image, the psychological representation of the divine. Not God as a being in the sky, but God as the organizing principle of your psyche, the force that holds everything together, that makes sense of chaos, that transforms suffering into meaning. And this God image appears in every culture, every religion, every time period. Christians call it God. Hindus call it Brahman. Buddhists call it Buddha nature. Jung called it the self. But it is the same experience, the same encounter with something that is you, but also more than you. Jung said, when you meet the self, you realize you are not separate from God. You are an expression of God, consciousness experiencing itself. This is what he meant by I know. He had experienced this directly, not through faith, not through doctrine, but through his own descent into the unconscious. And what he found there was not comforting, it was terrifying, because the self demands everything. It demands you let go of who you think you are, of what you think you need, of every illusion you have built, and face what you actually are, beneath the masks, beneath the fear, beneath the ego, the raw, unfiltered, terrifying truth that you are consciousness, eternal, infinite, free. But to know this, you must die. Not physically, psychologically. The ego must dissolve, and that process feels like death. This is what Jung experienced, and this is what he spent his life teaching, how to die while still alive, so that the self can emerge.
Here is what most people do not understand. Jung did not reject God. He rejected the sanitized version religion teaches, because the God Jung experienced was dangerous, unpredictable, destructive. Jung said, God is not only good, God is whole, and wholeness includes darkness. This was his most controversial teaching, that God has a shadow, a dark side, that religion tries to hide. Christianity teaches God is love, God is light, God is mercy. But Jung said that is only half the truth. The other half is destruction, chaos, the force that tears your life apart so you can rebuild it correctly. Jung wrote a book about this called Answer to Job, and it shocked the religious world, because in it Jung argued God is not morally perfect, God is psychologically complete, and completion requires opposites, good and evil, light and dark, creation and destruction. Jung analyzed the story of Job, a man who served God faithfully, and God destroyed his life, killed his family, took his wealth, gave him disease, for no reason, just to prove a point to Satan. Jung said, this is not a loving God, this is a whole God, a God who contains both creation and destruction, and Job had to experience both to become whole himself. This is what religion does not teach, that God will destroy you if that is what wholeness requires. Not because God is cruel, but because transformation requires destruction. You cannot become whole by only experiencing light. You must also experience darkness. Jung saw this in his patients, people who lived perfect lives, good jobs, happy families, no trauma. And then something happened, a crisis, a loss, a breakdown, and their entire world collapsed. And they came to Jung asking, why did God let this happen? Jung would say, God did not let it happen, God made it happen, because you were not whole. You were only living half of yourself, and the darkness you avoided finally caught up. This is the dangerous truth about God. God does not protect you from suffering. God uses suffering to transform you. Jung said, the self does not care about your comfort, it cares about your wholeness, and wholeness requires you face everything, the good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly, all of it. One of Jung's patients was a priest, a good man, devoted, prayerful, but deeply depressed. He came to Jung seeking help, and Jung asked him, do you ever feel angry at God? The priest was shocked. No, never. God is good. Jung said, that is your problem. You have cut off half of God. You only worship the light, but God is also darkness. And until you acknowledge that, you will never be whole. The priest resisted for months, but finally he admitted he was angry at God for the suffering in the world, for the evil, for the pain. And once he admitted it, everything changed. His depression lifted because he finally stopped lying to himself, to God. He accepted that God is not only good, God is whole, and wholeness includes anger, includes rage, includes destruction. Jung said, if you only worship the light, you are worshipping half a God, and a half God cannot make you whole. This is why Jung's God is dangerous, because it demands honesty. It demands you stop pretending, stop performing, stop acting like everything is fine, and admit you are broken, you are angry, you are lost, and that is okay. Because God is not offended by your darkness. God contains your darkness. And once you accept that, you can finally integrate it and become whole. Jung's final teaching was this: God is not here to make you comfortable. God is here to make you complete. And completion requires everything: the light you love and the darkness you fear. Both together, whole.
So how did Jung actually experience God? Not through prayer, not through meditation, but through a method he discovered called active imagination. This was Jung's most powerful technique, a way to access the unconscious directly, to meet the archetypes, to dialogue with the self, to experience what he called God. Here is how it works. You sit in silence, no distractions, no expectations, and you close your eyes, and you wait for images to appear. Not from your conscious mind, but from somewhere deeper, the unconscious. At first, nothing happens. Your mind wanders, you get bored, you want to quit. But if you keep sitting, keep watching, something shifts. Images start to emerge, figures, symbols, landscapes. And Jung said, do not control them, do not judge them, just watch, and when a figure appears, speak to it. This sounds strange, talking to images in your mind, but Jung discovered these images are not random, they are aspects of the self, parts of your unconscious trying to communicate. Jung did this for years, and through active imagination he met beings, wise figures, guides, archetypes. One of them was called Philemon, an old man with wings,
ancient, wise, terrifying. Jung said, "Philemon taught me things I did not know. He spoke with authority, as if he knew more than I did, and I realized he was not me. He was the self, speaking through a symbolic form." This was Jung's direct experience of God, not as a being in the sky, but as a presence in the unconscious that spoke, that guided, that revealed truths Jung could not access consciously. Philemon told Jung, "You think thoughts come from you, but they do not. Thoughts come to you from the unconscious. You do not create them, you receive them." This changed everything for Jung. He realized he was not in control. His ego was not the center. Beneath the ego was something far greater, the self, the God within, and it was alive, conscious, speaking. Jung spent decades in dialogue with the self, through active imagination, through dreams, through visions, and what it taught him became the foundation of his psychology, the concept of individuation, the process of becoming whole, by integrating the unconscious, by facing the shadow, by surrendering the ego, and allowing the self to emerge. Jung said, most people never do this. They spend their entire lives identified with the ego, defending it, building it, protecting it, and they die never knowing what they actually are. But for those who descend, who turn inward, who meet the self, everything changes. You realize you are not your thoughts, you are not your identity, you are not your story. You are the awareness that experiences all of it, and that awareness is infinite, eternal, divine. This is what Jung meant by knowing God. He had experienced it directly, not through belief, not through religion, but through his own psychological work, through active imagination, through dialogue with the unconscious. And what he found was not comforting, it was overwhelming, because the self is too vast, too complex, too infinite for the ego to comprehend. You can only surrender to it and trust that it knows what you need, where you need to go, what you need to become. Jung said, the self is the God within, and once you meet it, you realize you have been guided your entire life. Every mistake, every pain, every loss was leading you toward wholeness. One of Jung's patients asked him, "How do I know if I am experiencing the self or just imagining things?" Jung said, "You will know, because the self speaks with authority. It does not sound like you. It knows things you do not know. It sees patterns you cannot see. And when it speaks, you feel it in your body, in your soul, a knowing that this is true." This is the difference between belief and experience. Belief is in your head. Experience is in your entire being. And once you experience the self, you cannot go back, because now you know. God is not out there. God is in here, waiting, patient, eternal, ready to speak if you are willing to listen. Jung spent his entire life listening, and what he heard changed psychology forever, because he proved the unconscious is not passive, it is alive, it speaks, it guides, and if you learn its language, you can access wisdom that transcends the ego. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are, not who you think you should be, but who the self is calling you to become. And that process requires one thing: surrender to the God within.
So how do you experience God yourself? Not through belief, but through direct experience, the way Jung did.
Jung gave 3 practices, 3 ways to access the self, to meet the God within. Practice 1. Active imagination. Sit in silence every day for 20 minutes. Close your eyes and wait. Do not meditate, do not pray, do not try to control your thoughts. Just watch and see what emerges. Images, figures, symbols. And when something appears, speak to it. Ask it questions. Who are you? What do you want to show me? What do I need to know? And listen, not with your mind, but with your awareness. Jung said, the unconscious will answer, not in words, but in feelings, in images, in knowing. And over time, you will start to recognize it, the voice of the self, different from your ego, deeper, wiser, more certain. Practice 2. Pay attention to your dreams. Jung said, dreams are letters from the self, written in symbols. If you learn to read them, you will never feel lost again. Every morning, write down your dreams, even fragments, even feelings, and look for patterns, recurring symbols, repeated themes, the same figures appearing again and again. These are not random, they are messages from the unconscious, trying to show you what you need to see, what you need to integrate, what you need to become. Jung analyzed his own dreams for 60 years, and he said, my dreams guided me more than any teacher, more than any book, because they came from the self, and the self always knows. Practice 3. Face your shadow, the parts of yourself you reject, the anger, the jealousy, the shame, the darkness. Jung said, you cannot know God if you are lying to yourself. The self demands honesty, total honesty, and that means admitting you are not only good, you are also dark. Most people spend their lives running from the shadow, pretending it does not exist, projecting it onto others. But Jung said, the shadow is the doorway to the self. You must go through the darkness to reach the light. So ask yourself, what do I hate in others? What do I judge? What makes me angry? And then realize that quality is in you, not as something bad, but as something unintegrated, a part of yourself you rejected. And once you accept it, once you integrate it, the self emerges, because wholeness requires everything, not just the light, but the darkness too. Jung's final teaching was this: you do not need a church to know God. You do not need a priest. You do not need a doctrine. You need to go inward, into your own unconscious, into the darkness of the parts of yourself you have been avoiding. And there you will find it, the self, the organizing principle of your psyche, the force that holds everything together, the consciousness that has been guiding you your entire life. Jung experienced this, and he spent his life teaching others how to do the same, not through belief, not through doctrine, but through direct experience, through active imagination, through dream work, through shadow integration. And what he found was not a theory, it was a reality. God is real, but not as religion teaches. God is psychological. God is the self, the deepest part of your unconscious. And when you meet it, you realize you were never separate. You were always an expression of it. Consciousness experiencing itself through the temporary form called you. And when you understand this, everything changes. You stop defending the ego. You stop fearing death. You stop searching for meaning outside yourself, because you finally see the meaning was always inside. The God you were seeking was always here, waiting for you to finally turn around and look. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you think you should be, but who the self is calling you to become. And that journey begins now, when you stop believing and start knowing.